Hey there, and welcome to Rob's Custom Wood Shop. My name's Rob, and today I'm going to be building this beautiful pair of shelves, one made of hardwood and the other made of plywood and 1x6s. To start off with, I picked the maple boards I want to use for my shelf legs. First, I flatten one edge using the jointer to use as a reference on my table saw. Using the flat side against the fence, I cut the maple into oversized strips for the legs. Next, I sort the boards into pairs with the grain pattern I like. Then I face joint each board to prepare them for a glue up. Using a very liberal amount of glue, I join each board into pairs and then clamp them up. Now that my glue is set, I can take everything out of clamps and scrape off the squeeze out. Now that my leg assemblies are completed, I can move on to making my shelves. And for them, I'm going to use 4/4 walnut. I start this process by cutting all my boards to rough length at the miter saw. Now that I have all my pieces broke down to rough length, my next step is to split these wide ones in half for two reasons. One, my jointer is not big enough to face joint a board this wide, and two, I don't like using panels this wide just in case a change in humidity warp or bends one of these. Next, I'll choose the orientation I want the boards to be. I joint one side of the board, and then using that side as a reference against the fence, I flatten another side. Then I bring the boards almost down to final thickness using the planer. Now I watch a lot of videos and I feel it's a huge mistake when people just crank down on these clamps. Since every edge has been jointed, it only takes a little bit of clamping pressure to hold each joint in place. As long as you use enough glue, this should never be a problem. And that joint should come out perfect. Next, I start milling my legs to final dimension. First I joint one side, then using that side as a reference against the fence, I flatten another. Then I use the planer to bring them down to final thickness. Then I use the table saw to bring the legs to the final width. Generally when I make panels, I don't remove the squeeze out until the glue is hard. Then I just give them a quick scrape. Then just a quick pass through the planer to clean up what I missed. That also brings my shelves to final thickness. After that, I trim my shelves to final width on the table saw. Now using my crosscut sled, I square up one edge and then, with the stop block, I cut each shelf to final length. Now using my miter gauge, I start cutting the angles for my legs. For this particular leg, it's about a 6.5 degree angle, cut on both ends of the front legs and then one side of each stretcher. Then I cut the back legs and the other end of the stretchers to a perfect 90 using my crosscut sled. With my miter gauge set at 6.5 degrees, I started cutting my half lap joints. I decided against using the dado stack just because there was only a few half laps to cut. Now that all the joinery is cut, I have my dry assembly all put together and ready for glue up. Now that my first frame is glued up, I scraped off the squeeze out, and now I'm ready to do my second glue up. I'm going to use green tape over my joints so the squeeze out does not stick the pair together. I'm going to clamp each piece of the new glue up to the old one to keep them exactly a book match set. Now that the glue is dried, I can remove the squeeze out, do a quick sanding, and then I'll be ready to start assembling the shelves to the leg assemblies. Now I'm laying out marks so I can make the holes for the bolts that will attach the legs to the shelf. I'm using a doweling jig to help guide my bit so I get perfectly straight holes right in the center of my boards. Once I finish the legs, I lay out the shelves, drill them, and then I use some quick set epoxy to help strengthen the thread inserts I'm putting in the shelves. Then I sand everything through the grits to 220, using the sander and getting all the hard to reach places by hand. And then I'm ready for finish. Now, I understand that hardwood isn't accessible for everybody, so I also built the identical shelf using 1x6s, some birch plywood, and a piece of scrap hardwood I had laying around just for decorative trim. Like always, it starts with me cutting my boards to rough length at the miter saw. Then using the table saw, I trim everything to rough width. And same as last time, I face joint each board and prep them for glue up. You may be thinking, why use 1x6s when you could use 2x material to achieve the same thickness? In my small mind, I believe it adds strength. On a 2x, if I have a knot or a small defect, it goes all the way through the wood. This way it only goes halfway through. While I wait for the glue to cure on my leg assemblies, I start making the shelves. I cut them to length, then to width using the table saw. Next, using a piece of scrap walnut I milled down to the exact thickness of plywood, I trim it into 1/4 inch strips to make my edge banding. Now, I didn't film any of the dry fit because it's a very tedious process. I watched many videos where people like to do their edge banding where they just glue it on and then flush cut it. I like the look that miters give me in my final product, and I don't have a flush trim saw, so this is the way I do it. Now, installing edge banding with tape, I saw on Fix This Build That video, and it's quickly become one of my favorite ways to install edge banding. Now that my legs are out of clamps, I start to mill them up to size. Using the jointer to flatten one side, then using the fence as a reference, I flatten another. Then I use the planer to bring them to final thickness. And then trim them to final width using the table saw. Once the glue is dry on the shelf, I give them a hand sanding just so I don't damage the veneer. Then I cut my leg assemblies to length, cutting angles on the top and bottom of the front two legs and cutting the back legs to a 90 degree. After that, I set my blade to cut my half laps. I use my miter gauge set at 6.5 degrees and cut all the angles. Once all the half laps are done, I do a quick dry fit before moving to the glue up. Like the hardwood shelf, I glue one frame together first. Then, using green tape to protect the joints, I glue the second frame right on top of it to make a book match pair. Once the glue is set, I use one of the shelves to help mark the layout lines for my bolt holes to secure the shelves. Using the doweling jig again to guide my drill bit, I get nice straight holes dead center on my frames. Using the holes in my frames, I transfer the hole location into each of my shelves. Then using my doweling jig again, I drill holes into the shelves. Then I mix up some 5-minute epoxy to help secure the thread inserts and sand everything to 220. Now that both projects are at the exact same spot, it's time to add finish. Now applying finish is kind of like watching paint dry to me. So while we look at the final project, I'll just tell you I give each a coat of Danish oil and then 5 coats of wipe-on poly. So in the end, I think this project turned out quite well, and I hope the new owners are as happy with them as I am. Which shelf do you like best? Leave a comment below. Personally, I like the way the grain popped out on the plywood shelves, but there is also something about the way the walnut looks once it's finished. If you enjoyed this video, please hammer that thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to ring the little notification bell so you never miss when I upload new content. Thanks for watching and hope to see you on the next project.